But anyway, switching gears a little, but this still uses fossils, is the field of evolutionary theory called biogeography. Now, that's even a general term because there's lots of types of biogeography. But biogeography is basically the study of where organisms live now and where their ancestors lived in the past. The reason why the key prediction that biogeographers are trying to figure out is, and it's pretty much confirmed every time, is new organisms are only really found in the same area of the world as where their ancestors were from.
Yes.
Okay? So, specific example, and this was on an earlier slide. There's the glyptodont up there. A fossil that I'm pretty sure is sponsored by Volkswagen because every
how big is it?
It's as big as a Volkswagen Beetle. Seriously, look it up anywhere, and they're always like, it's as big as a Volkswagen Beetle. But anyway, armadillos are not that big, but armadillos are incredibly similar, and we're pretty sure it's the glyptodonts are the ancestors of the armadillos. Well, you only find armadillos in North and South America. They are nowhere else in the world, partially because they're thought to have evolved after North and South America split from everything else. Now, guess where you find glyptodonts fossils?
I'm going to guess North and South America.
Right. And the point being is if armadillos were to randomly arise somewhere in the world, or randomly arise at all, you would see them somewhere else in the world besides exactly where their ancestors were.
And if you've ever seen an armadillo, they are not swimming across the ocean.
Right. Yeah, they cannot swim. Yeah, nothing.
They
really
would
can swim
drop
across
like
the-
a rock.
Yes, they would. So moving along to, this is a big part of biogeography, is looking at islands, because islands are incredibly interesting. Now, there's a few features of islands that are particularly interesting. And I'm talking about oceanic islands. So we're talking about small, volcanically formed islands. If you need an explanation for what that is, please ask me in class.
Like Hawaii.
Yeah, like Hawaii. It's formed by underwater volcanoes. And they came along much later than the continents. Now, since they, if you notice when you go there, these islands have no native mammals, amphibians, reptiles, or freshwater fish, but they do have insects, plants, and birds. What can insects, plants, and birds do well that the other ones can't?
They can travel long distances quite easily.
Right. So,
because plants can just run across.
Right. Freshwater fish could not swim from, say, California to Hawaii because they would die in the salt. I don't know any mammal that could swim that far, but
I can't swim at 10 feet.
Really? I thought you'd be a good swimmer.
I'm not a swimmer.
Anyway, but the idea is if mammals, for example, were randomly scattered throughout the earth, you would expect to see one native mammal on some form of island, but really the only thing you see on islands, once again, native to the islands, are these things that travel well.
No, but wait, didn't we say that they have iguana on the Galapagos?
They do have iguanas on the Galapagos. It has been found that iguanas will occasionally get onto some driftwood and ride it out and see where they go.
So that would explain, because we never exactly said how plants can get to islands.
Right. Well, yeah, and plants usually they'll get eaten by birds and pooped out, or even just carried in their feathers. Coconuts
That's the
float.
Scientific term, by the way,
Yeah.
pooped out.
Yeah, pooped out, yes. But another thing that, if you look at islands, that's pretty interesting, is that the native species that do exist there, so the birds, the plants, and the insects, they're incredibly similar to the mainland that is very close to them. So the Galapagos finches, which is that island that's in the red box on that lower picture, are really similar to the finches that are
in South America.
Yeah. So you'd expect if these finches were to randomly appear on the Galapagos Islands, if it were truly random, it's just as likely they'd resemble something else than what's directly next door to them. But instead, they resemble what's directly next door, making it seem more likely that something traveled from the mainland to the Galapagos. And one more thing on oceanic islands and the Galapagos is over a period of time on those different islands, there are different species, but they are still really, really similar. They're all like in the same genus. If it were truly random and there were going to be separate species on all these different islands, wouldn't you say that you wouldn't have just all finches? You'd have like finches, hawks, eagles, like that sort of thing. But no, they're all finches. Meaning it's much more logical that these finches just spread out among those islands and kind of speciated on their own, which we can talk in more detail in class. One kind of interesting example also of biogeography is the evolution of marsupials. So where do you find most marsupials?
Today, Australia.
Yeah, although the possums in North America.
In North
right?
America.
There are a few marsupials, but I think I read 70% of marsupials are in Australia. And that said, in Australia, most of the mammals are marsupials. Now, how does this happen? Well, hi, Mr. Harkins. It's thought that, or I mean, I shouldn't say it's thought. It's pretty well backed up that there are, long ago, we got Pangea and all the continents are together. Now, at some point, Antarctica and Australia are actually attached to each other, and they're barely attached to South America. Now, at that point, we do know there were marsupials in North America, and that's probably what the possums we have now evolved from. Now, we start seeing fossils over time migrate south. Even into Antarctica. There are possum fossils, or not possum, but like marsupial fossils in Antarctica.
Yes.
To a point where they made it all the way to Australia, and at this point, Australia was probably starting to break off, and it did break off. Now, those marsupials were the only mammals that we know from the fossil record that were on Australia when that happened. So if there were random animals created later or mammals created later in time, you'd expect to see some non-marsupials. But no, you only see marsupials because all the mammals that are on Australia descended from that original marsupial that made its way to Australia. Is that good?
Exactly correct.
Yeah. I was afraid I wouldn't
Nope, that was good.
explain that perfectly. All right, so finally, the last thing, convergent evolution. Darwin, like we said, he noticed things evolve, same adaptations in separate area of the world. This is called convergent evolution. And this is because these organisms, they're adapting to very, very similar environments. Because the same adaptations will favor them in those environments. So like those euphorbs are more native to the African deserts, and the cacti are more native to like Arizona, New Mexico. Very similar climates, totally different plant life in different areas long ago that evolved very similar characteristics.
And it's the same thing as a shark and a dolphin. They look similar when you really look at their main body form, simply because they happen to evolve in the same location.
Yeah.
Completely different, though. Dolphins, mammals, sharks, fish.
Right. So anyway, I think that is it for today. Thank you for helping me, Thank you for helping me, Mr. Hillis.
You're welcome, Mr. Carnstead.
Yeah. And remember to do your checkpoint. Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Harkins.